The Australian larrikin is defined as a boisterous, often badly behaved young man or person with an apparent disregard for convention. Put simply, a maverick. This image of the Aussie larrikin has become synonymous with the Australian culture, so much so that it has become their worldwide brand. From Paul Hogan's Crocodile Dundee, the rock band AC/DC, standover man / entrepreneur Chopper Read, and of course our favourite, Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, RIP. Australians have also aided in cultivating this image as the lovable larrikin, who is fun, relaxed, and always up for a good time, no matter the circumstances. But where did this image and culture originate from? Well, today on His and Hers History, we're going to take a look back at the history of the Australian larrikin and the characters that helped to shape its image. Hello and welcome to His and Hers History. I'm your host, Aaron, and this is my co-host, Stephanie.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. I'm excited for this episode.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, I thought.
It's one close to your heart.
Yes, definitely. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Before I begin, though, if you're new to the podcast, let me catch you up to speed. Each week, either myself or Steph bring a historical topic to the podcast, either a person, place, or event, and we present said historical topic. The only catch is the host presenting knows all the facts, and the host listening knows nothing at all. By doing this, we can have a light-hearted look at the past with genuine reactions, and you guys can laugh along with us as we dissect and potentially ruin history. Now, Steph, I described a larrikin in my intro there, but what's your definition of a larrikin? What do you think a larrikin is?
Someone who's not very serious.
Yeah, I'd say that, yeah. They don't take life too seriously.
No, don't take life too seriously. There are other words in Australia we would probably use to define a larrikin.
Maybe that aren't probably not appropriate.
No.
Perhaps. But when I thought of a larrikin, the first person that came to mind is actually your father. Because some of the stories I've heard about him in his younger years, he fits the larrikin description perfectly.
Yes.
And then immediately I thought about my father,
Yes.
who is also in his younger years I would describe as a larrikin. You know, they love having a good time. Not necessarily the most organised people in the world.
Definitely not.
They just go where the wind takes them, sort of thing. And I think about that.
And take other people along on that journey sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, regardless of whether they want to be there or not. But I thought about that within the Australian culture. I suppose if you talk to anyone, particularly our age, they would mention an uncle or an auntie or their mum or their dad who they would consider a larrikin. So
Absolutely.
I think it's a deep part of our culture, and that's why I'd like to cover it, and maybe where the origins of where it started. So
Very treasured Australian culture.
that is it. Exactly right. But before I begin, I would just like to mention any Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people should be aware that this podcast contains names and images of deceased persons, and we'll also be talking about the mistreatment of Indigenous Australians during European colonisation of Australia. And know that we don't find it funny. However, we would like to include these individuals as they're an important part of Australian history. And I think we'll get to them later in the episode, but they showed a great sense of humour and courage in less than ideal circumstances, which is a part of Australian culture, which we'll talk about a bit more. Having said that, you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Okay, part one, Against the Grain. Potentially the first ever Australian larrikin, Sir Henry Brown Hayes, had the unique accomplishment of being knighted and also being a transported felon to the colony of Australia. Both of these titles lie at either end of the scale of life, you would have to agree. So keep that in mind. He's been knighted by the King and Queen.
Yep.
So he's a person of high standings, but he's also been shipped to a colony for...
He's a convict.
Convicts, yeah. Interesting. What could someone do to possibly fall so far from grace? We'll find out. He was born and raised in Cork Island, the son of a reputable Cork local, Atterwell Hayes. He was able to make a name for himself, and become a man of high standings within the South Cork militia. Although it is noted that he was well known for his irregular behaviour, and it was sometimes questioned for that. In the year of 1782, he was made a freeman of the city and then promoted to sheriff. Then in 1790, he was knighted for his services throughout this time as sheriff, and life looked grand for this soon-to-be larrikin immortal.
Wow, so someone could have been knighted for being a sheriff.
I'm sort of thinking they threw around knightings
Yeah.
willy-nilly back then because it's like, but hey, he might have been really, really good at his job. But you'll soon see that irregular behaviour starts to creep into his life.
I like how they're so formal. irregular behaviour. Like,
Yeah, that's
they don't actually name what the behaviour is, but they're just like,
and that
it
is
was irregular.
quintessential larrikin behaviour, being irregular.
Oh, absolutely.
So it is a touch ironic that during this time, Hayes was the Crown agent that was responsible for transporting 150 of his fellow Irishmen to the colony of Australia. It's ironic because several years later, he would be joining his fellow countrymen as a convicted felon. So he continued his duties for a number of years. However, in 1797, Mr. Hayes got the bright idea that he would kidnap a local Quaker by the name of Mary Pike, who was the heiress to a £20,000 fortune, which back then would have been a large sum of money. Do you know what a Quaker is?
Yeah, it's a religion.
Yeah, it's like a religious group.
So was the reason he kidnapped her because of her fortune,
I
or
don't know.
the fact she was a Quaker?
I don't know. Now, he's a freeman, whatever that is. I probably should look that up.
Is it a Freemason?
No, I don't
Shall
think
we
so.
pause and
But he's a
look it
sheriff. No, he's a sheriff, right? So he's like paid well,
Yeah.
and he's a knight. He's
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah.
Like he's doing well, and then he kidnaps this woman out of nowhere for no particular reason that I can...
But she was an heiress.
Yes. So he's obviously after the money, but what an odd decision. It's bizarre. We'll continue. He then tried to force Mary Pike to marry him so that he could indulge in that sweet, sweet Quaker money. However, the heiress was rescued shortly after the kidnap. It's worth noting that Hayes was a widower and had several children, but that doesn't excuse his behaviour.
Okay,
I mean, the dating game was hard out there in late 1700s Ireland, I understand, but kidnapping women and forcing them to marry you, probably not a good idea.
Surely that isn't legally standing and legally binding if you're like forced to marry. Actually, no, don't worry. It probably was.
Oh, back then, who knows what was happening.
You probably signed the papers and that
He
was
was like,
it.
I'm the sheriff, I can get away with whatever I like. You're going to marry me, Mary, and you get me that fortune. I do like accents.
Here
I'm
come
sorry.
the
I couldn't help myself. So we'll press on. So he was going to force her to marry.
Yes.
After this wildly unnecessary kidnapping of the Quaker, Hayes went on the run for 2 years without capture. After this time, he considered himself safe to return, and he went on trial for his kidnap. He was so confident that he would be let off scot-free, God only knows why, because he had literally no defence. Unfortunately, he was sentenced to death, but then this was then downgraded or upgraded, depending on how you look at it, to the transportation to the colony of Australia.
So that seems like a fair reason to be transported and in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I know that in school in Australia we learn about the colonists and when they came over. And I think like my extent was like, oh, they could steal a loaf of bread and then they were transported. Like that was the extent of my education.
I think like a great majority of them were people that just did petty crimes.
Or
like
is that just
to
Australians trying to
No, but I think that's
justify our heritage?
I think that was a result of like the class system. They didn't have enough money and things to survive, so they were stealing and they were being sent over to free labour.
His reason seems legit.
Yeah, it seems like a very serious reason, but hence the larrikinism. And he went on the run for 2 years and then decided, you know what, they'll forgive me. Typical larrikin behaviour. I'm so lovable, they'll let me go. Had no defence.
I can imagine both of our dads thinking like that too.
My dad, he wouldn't even go on the run. He'd just be like, what, you can't try it? Try it. He would. I'm going to ask him that one day. So he was transported on the 6th of July, 1802 on the ship the Atlas. However, because of his notable background and wealth, he was able to buy himself a cushier ride to the colony. And just as well as the journey of the Atlas was seen as one of the worst in transportation history. Now, it didn't actually say, and I couldn't find out why, but I'm assuming that's because of disease, rough conditions, things like that.
I don't think it was a very high-class transport.
No, but he was able to buy himself a cushier ride, whatever that means.
Well, he was knighted, so...
Yeah, that's right. Maybe his reputation helped him. It's also worth noting that while on the ship, he decided to antagonise and get under the skin of a famous surgeon by the name of Thomas Jamison, earning himself an extra...
Jamison?
No, I don't think it's that Jamison. Get under the skin of a famous surgeon by the name of Thomas Jamison and earning himself an extra 6 months on top of his already lengthy sentence. Again, massive larrikin behaviour. The chips are down. He's already backed into a corner, and he decides to antagonize. I had trouble with that word. That's weird. antagonise someone that's like
Yeah.
in a superior position, which again I think is a part of Australian humour and culture, is that we love an underdog, and when they're backed into the corner, that's when they're at their most fiery.
And we like to take people down as
We
well.
like taking the mickey out of people.
We like pulling them down a peg.
However, if I was being transported for a crime, I probably wouldn't antagonise anyone. After his journey on the Atlas, Hayes found himself in New South Wales as the first and most likely only knighted convict. Here his larrikin-like behaviour continued in the form of writing. Although there is no direct evidence, it is safe to assume that he was involved in the Castle Hill Rising in 1804, which was the first ever Australian rebellion in which mainly Irish convicts rose up against government troops. As he was there at the time and had strong links and friendships to other notable scallywags that were responsible for the riots at Castle Hill, we can assume that he was involved in some way, shape or form. And let's be honest, this man's track record of poor decision making, he would have jumped at the chance to be involved in riots of some form. After this failed rebellion, he was sent away to Van Diemen's Land, or Tasmania, before returning back to Sydney, where he spent his time until 1808. Following this, he was sent to the coal mines in New South Wales as a result of him openly showing sympathy for former Governor William Bligh, who had been displaced as governor and was involved in the rebellion that he had been assigned to deal with. So there's a whole other story there, but there was a governor assigned to deal with the rebellion, and somehow he got involved, and then he got kicked out, and then he came back.
So the governor got involved in the rebellion?
There was way too much. I was like going to research, and I was like, this is going to take forever in itself. So I just sort of skipped over.
That might be another episode.
Yeah, it potentially could be. But anyway, he got kicked out, but then he came back, and there's a whole story. Another part of the larrikin persona is sticking to your guns no matter what the circumstances
Very
are.
true, yes.
And again, Mr. Hayes, for right or for wrong, shows this quality many times throughout his life. So maybe a normal person, I guess, a non-larrikin person, would just say whatever they need to say to get out of trouble. But he was like, no, I like this guy. I sympathise with him. And they're like, well, you realise you're going to get more time for this? He's like, I don't care. Like, he sticks to his guns, which is larrikin behaviour, I would say. After a short time in the coal mines, he was eventually pardoned. It's not exactly clear to me why, as there was a whole other backstory that I mentioned before about the rebellion, and I don't want to dive too deep into that. But after his pardon, Hayes sailed back to Cork after a short time living in Sydney, where he retired and lived out his days until his death in 1832. So quite an interesting life that he started off pretty privileged.
Yeah.
And he was in a good position, had a good job and had wife and kids and stuff like that.
He decided to wife
And
himself
then
up again.
just flicked the switch and went full crazy, full larrikin. But he displayed some of the
It doesn't sound like it was a complete switch flick.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and the thing is, I don't think he's a good guy, but I don't think he's a bad guy.
Yes.
No,
okay.
but like you understand, like he's committed a crime. What he did was horrible, but he showed some admirable traits as well, like sticking by friends and things like that, which is a part of the larrikin and Aussie sort of persona, I would have thought.
Sure.
You're disagreeing with me. I see your eyes. Well, I'll have to convince you. Take this guy on for size. Part 2, taking the mickey. William Billy Blue was an Australian convict and settler. He was believed to have been born in Jamaica and lived in New York for a time, where he claimed he fought for the British in the American War of Independence. Or quite possibly, he was a freed American slave. It's not clear which of these stories is true.
That is, wild.
I think he said that he fought for the British and stuff like that, but maybe he did that.
People don't really believe
Maybe he
that.
did that to like get on in life.
Yep.
Perhaps, but it's not exactly clear. Either way, he arrived in London after his time in New York and was working as a chocolate maker and labourer in the shipyards on the River Thames. Like most men from a foreign country, he found it hard to make a consistent living and as a result resorted to theft. He was caught stealing raw sugar, presumably to help with his chocolate making, and as a result was sentenced to 7 years transportation. The first 4 were spent on convict hulks, before finally he was sent to Botany Bay in the year of 1796. He was 29 years old at the time. So quite a life up until this point in itself that he's lived, if it's true, his backstory. But his life gets way better here, and this, you can't help but love this guy. and he's a great character. After finding his way to Sydney in 1801, he began living with an English-born woman, a fellow convict by the name of Elizabeth. They settled in the city, and shortly after they were married, and this marriage resulted in 6 children. So presumably Elizabeth was white as well, so which would have been, I don't know, probably pretty odd at the time to see. Billy continued his previous work as a waterman and built a reputation for himself that endeared him to the government and public, particularly the wealthy. Billy was known to the locals because of his distinct appearance and his whimsical style and his exceptional banter. He was so well liked, in fact, that his frequent infringements of the law were let slide by local enforcement, simply because he was Billy and no one could ever be responsible for his arrest.
I know lots of people like that.
Yeah, and this
they just
guy
get away with things because they're
guy
a
had,
likable
like,
person.
Yeah, he had like charm and charisma, and I think people really liked him, so they were just like, it's Billy. He was said to be Australia's first celebrity. So not a celebrity as in like a governor or something like that you would think back then.
Just an average
but someone
Joe
that you'd see, that's Billy Blue.
Yeah.
Like everyone knew who he was. He was well known for his dapper appearance. He would strut about town with a top hat and a discarded military uniform with such a swagger that the locals couldn't help but like the man. It is believed that his utter disregard for the fact that he was a black convict, in combination with his supreme confidence and the dignified way that he carried himself, that helped to encourage the Sydney's cultural elite to have a laugh at their own pompous behaviour. Another important aspect of the Aussie larrikin is poking fun at authority and the upper class, punching up, so to speak, and Billy clearly had this in spades. This can be seen as the first steps of a nation well known for making fun of itself, building a foundation of its have-a-go attitude. Through Billy's actions, he was able to help the wealthy see that they are not so different from everyday folk and somewhat bridge the gap between classes, something that Australians are well known for. So one thing Aussies are known for is making fun of one another, regardless of your job or your stature in life.
Yep.
We sort of poke fun at one another. And the more successful you are, it seems the more we poke fun at you. And he potentially could have been the catalyst for that because they sort of...
He sounds like a cool character.
Yeah, but I couldn't figure out when I was reading it whether he did that because he thought he was like that or he was taking the mickey out of them. But either way, he like made them sort of look at themselves and go, hey, well, yeah, we are kind of a bit stupid sometimes, like prancing around in all our top hats and stuff like that. And he must have known that he had this charm and charisma because he uses it quite frequently throughout his life. So Billy made good on his reputation by gaining himself more sturdy employment. In 1811, Governor Macquarie appointed Billy the harbour watchman, a highly sought after and important job. His newly acquired job allowed him to purchase a home overlooking Sydney's harbour, something that would be worth untold millions in today's market.
Very true.
Yeah.
My goodness, I can't imagine how much
I think
his land would be worth now.
Yeah, and I think it's called Blues Point or Billy's Point.
Oh,
or something
really?
like. So it's like it's actually quite well known. The governor also frequented the ferries that Billy ran. Such was his trust in the man, and even coined him the Commodore, a title which he happily ran with, and he would greet passengers with calling himself Old Commodore. So he had a sense of humour as well. Mm-hmm. Later that year, he acquired farmland, around 80 acres, at the southernmost point of Port Jackson. He identified that this land was in a prime position for a ferryman and set about buying a fleet of ferries in which he could use for his business. But once a larrikin, always a larrikin. The position of his land along the shoreline allowed for the perfect opportunity to partake in the smuggling of goods. In October 1818, he was arrested for smuggling rum on one of his ferries. Billy Blue claimed that he found them floating at sea, so he tied them to his boat to return them to the harbour. However, the powers that be didn't believe him and encouraged him to out his fellow smugglers, but Billy held firm to his innocence and was sentenced to 1 year's jail for his trouble. Again, we see, for right or for wrong, the attitude of the Australian larrikin sticking to his guns. So I don't know if he stole the goods, but he's stolen in the past, and we'll find out later he's committed other crimes. So there's every chance he was involved in smuggling, but hey, he was just trying to make a living.
They're just risk takers. These
That's it,
larrikins.
and that's it. Risk takers, people that just go with the flow. Like some of them, he might not have. That morning he might have woken up and gone, "I'm going to do my ferry job," and someone went, "Do you want to smuggle some rub?" And he went, "Absolutely, yeah, why not?" Who knows? You've got to put yourself in the mind of a larrikin. So Billy's supposed other crimes during his working life in Sydney consisted of harbouring escaped convicts, although this was never proven. Again, like a larrikin would probably do that. He was tried with manslaughter for throwing a stone at a young boy who had been tormenting him.
Oh my goodness.
The boy later died from the injuries he sustained. However, Billy was acquitted for the crime, presumably because he was like, "Hey, come on." He was making fun of him though. "Yeah, on you go, Billy." He probably
Surely
was.
not.
He probably was. In 1824, his wife Elizabeth passed away, and 10 years later, Billy followed suit, leaving his property and all his belongings to his 3 sons. Such was his legacy that parts of the harbour are still named after him, that I mentioned before, as well as street names. You can still find portraits of him in the Mitchell Library in Sydney, and Sir James Dowling, a famous judge at the time, described Billy Blue as an eccentric, loquacious character. And if that doesn't scream Aussie larrikin, then I'll go he. So he, for someone that was of Jamaican origin or African American origin, it's not quite clear, to have the life he did and make the life he did for himself is pretty amazing.
That's right.
And by all accounts, he was like, just you couldn't help but love him. He was like a really, really nice character.
Other than the manslaughter, of course.
Yeah, that was kind of, when I was reading, I was like, this bloke's really good. And I was like, oh my goodness.
Why do they always have to ruin it?
But then there was like the kid was making fun of him, and I think, well.
I know he probably would have been saying awful things.
Oh, yeah.
But.
And how unlucky do you have to be to throw a stone and kill someone? I mean, talk about a good arm. That's a good arm if he can throw a rock and kill someone. But hey, they let him off, so there was obviously some more to the story. Pressing on. Part 3, Indigenous Larrikins. It's worth noting that Indigenous Australians have also contributed to the sense of humour and larrikinism that we hold so dear. They display this in the harshest of environments and circumstances. Even under great duress, they were still able to crack a smile and find humour within what could only be described as a less than ideal situation. So we've got 2 Indigenous characters that we're going to talk about. Arabanu, I think I'm saying that right, was an Australian man that was captured against his will in Manly in the year of 1878. His captors aimed to use him as a means of communication with the local tribes and to gain a greater understanding of the Aboriginal people.
That's a great idea. Oh, we want to understand you, so we're going to kidnap you.
And that's the thing about this that's really sad is they kidnap these Indigenous men and women, and then the men and women like show courage and like a sense of humour and stuff, and it endears them to the Europeans, but they still don't see like, hey, like I can have a laugh with this guy. This guy's like humorous. Maybe we should let him go. Like it's quite sad. Arabanu was described as mild and gentle with a thoughtful face, and although he assisted his captors, it is said that, and I quote, the independence of his mind never forsook him. Basically, he still had his own thoughts and would protest and defy anything that he did not agree with. Another strong attribute of the Aussie larrikin.
Very true.
So much was his independence that, and I quote, if the slightest insult was offered to him, he would return it with interest and frequently turn a laugh against his antagonist. So you can imagine the balls on this man. He's been captured by an invading force, and when he's presented with aggression or some form of humiliation, he turns the tables back on his captors and makes them the butt of the joke.
But like twofold.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
they have no comeback at all.
And you can imagine like all the Europeans, and they'd be like, oh, when he like burned them, like, Arabanu got you good. I hope that's how it went down.
Yes.
That's probably not how it went down, but again, like he's showing like he's basically a slave, and he's got the courage to turn the joke around on them and make them the butt of the joke, which is like really clever. These traits that Arabanu displayed endeared him to the European colonists who looked on him favourably, which is a bit of an insult considering they basically imprisoned an innocent man, but I like to think that they might have admired him somewhat. I would have definitely, had I been in that situation. Similar to Billy, although Billy had a better life, I would say. Unfortunately, not long after his capture, there was an outbreak of smallpox, which was devastating to the local Aboriginal population. as it was an introduced disease. Arabinu during this time helped many of the sick and diseased Aboriginals that were found until he himself succumbed to the disease and died in May of 1879, less than a year after being captured. But even with such a short interaction with the colonists, he had a massive impact on those that had anything to do with him. So they only knew him for a few months, but yet he's been remembered and recorded in history as someone that was defiant and, showed really good character.
And had a great comeback.
Yeah, that's right. Which is, if ever you've been on the receiving end of like you're use someone as a joke and they get you back and turn it back on you, it is the most humbling feeling in the world.
I also think it's pretty impressive. He didn't just, obviously he spoke his first language, but he'd also have to speak English. It's a much bigger thing to be able to give a good comeback when it's not your first language.
That's right.
So
and this next character
impressive.
You'll see, this next character is really impressive as well for that exact reason, because of learning English. So Bennelong was an Aboriginal man captured in 1879. Have you heard of Bennelong?
I have heard of Bennelong.
I've heard that name before, but I wasn't aware of who he was or what he did. So, yeah, he was an Aboriginal man captured in 1879 and brought back to Sydney Cove. Similar to Arabinu, he was detained for the purpose of understanding the Indigenous people. However, unlike Arabinu, Bennelong took to European life, indulging in their food and drink, and even learnt how to speak English. During this time, he was quite fond of the Governor Arthur Phillips and spent a lot of time with him, even lodging at his home. After a short time, Bennelong escaped and went back to the bush. He was found months later among other Aboriginals around the area of Manly, where it is believed that there was a misunderstanding and Governor Phillips was speared by the Aboriginals. Bennelong had no part in this act, however. Bennelong was so concerned for Arthur Phillips' health that he frequently appeared near Sydney Cove to inquire of the Governor's health. As a result of this, communications were opened up again with Bennelong, and he began to frequent the settlement with other Aboriginals. It is noted that Bennelong loved to wear European clothes and mimicked the habits and speech of white Europeans he came into contact with, and is said to have done so with, and I quote, devastating wit. He was also well known for imitating Arthur Phillips' French cook with great hilarity. So he was a bit of a jokester, a bit of a prankster. Bennelong was described as bold with an intrepid countenance. Basically, he looked fearless. It's said that, and I quote, love and war seemed to be his favourite pursuits. He was involved in many tribal wars and had 2 wives over his lifetime. Other accounts of him described him as courageous, intelligent, vain, quick-tempered, tender with children, and something of a comedian. All of these qualities, again, scream Aussie Larrikin, and I think we can agree that Bennelong was the quintessential Larrikin archetype. Bennelong passed away on the 3rd of January 1813 at Kissing Point. And there was some other things I didn't write down, that I didn't include, but he got to meet King George. But unfortunately, while I was doing that, his first wife left him. He also had trouble with alcohol and things like that. But which is sad about his life, but it turns out like maybe he made good on a situation that wasn't great for him. He tried his best, but he shows all those traits of a Larrikin. So that's the end of the episode. There's only 3 characters.
There was 4.
Sorry, 4. There was, sorry. I'll leave a link to the website that I use that talks about the Larrikin legacy. It's really good. There's heaps more that I could have included, but I didn't want to spend too long talking about it. What were your thoughts?
I really liked it. I liked that we heard about some ones that I've never heard of before.
Yeah.
I found it funny that 2 of them were actually not Australian born.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
It sort of is what we've become, all those like convicts.
That's it, the combination.
Apparently that's where we got our accent, because it sounds like we're drunk or something, the drunk English accent.
And I listen back to our podcast and it sounds like I'm drunk sometimes, the way I'm slurring my words. But you're right, it's that combination of all the different cultures and coming in. And I thought I would include like what most people would be thinking of when they think of like a Larrikin from history, a convict from like Ireland or England. And I thought I would include someone who's not from that background, so Billy Blue, who was definitely not the standard convict background. It's someone of different descent. And then I thought I would include some of the First Nations people as they helped contribute to that culture of larrikinism and stuff as well, which I found interesting because considering the circumstances that they were in, they were still able to show
Humour
and stuff. And I'm sure there would have been some horrible mistreatment of them. But that's the thing I thought, if you saw someone and you were mistreating them so horribly, yet they still fought back against you and still had a laugh, surely you'd be like, these guys are all right. Like, that's the way I would have thought. And I would have been like, why are we treating them like this? They're clearly funny and like intelligent people. But hey. So yeah, that's what I thought I'd do, cover the legacy of the Australian larrikin. And what I was thinking I might do is maybe I'll revisit this at some stage. I might cover some women because this is very heavily skewed towards men. However, there are lots of women larrikins that feature in Australian history as
Very
well.
true.
So I might cover them. Or maybe you could do that for a female perspective.
Yeah, maybe.
Because I didn't actually read on them. I just found them there. And I also thought I didn't want to cover the Ned Kellys and things like that most people
they're
know
pretty
about.
well known.
Yeah, that's right. So I thought I'd cover some ones that are lesser known. Wrap up. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of His and Hers History, told in the His and Hers to History way. Did you enjoy it, Steph?
I did enjoy it. It was very good. I enjoyed learning about different people.
Yeah.
That I've
Maybe
never
we'll
heard
feature
of.
your dad. Is the larrikin we know and love.
Oh, I don't know if those stories are very
His stories are probably
appropriate.
appropriate. If you would like to listen to more episodes, you can find us at our website, hisandhershistory.podbean.com, the Podbean app, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music /Audible, and we have a YouTube channel if you'd like to see some of the images. And on this episode, I'll include some of the characters we've talked about so you can get a look, especially come and have a look at Billy Blue because he's quite a dapper
I
gentleman.
can't wait
The
to see
picture's
this
amazing.
picture.
He looks awesome. So feel free to comment and follow our podcast on whatever platform suits you. Leave any feedback or ideas that you have because we would love to know what people like and how we can improve. Don't forget to share this with your friends, family, any work colleagues, or just anyone that you think might find this podcast interesting. By doing this, you can help us build our community and we can provide you with some entertaining looks back at a variety of historical topics.
That's right.
Do you have any clues for next week's episodes?
I do.
Yes?
I was going to do one episode, but then I found a really much better idea
Is
this
going
morning.
to be His and Hers History first double episode?
No.
Oh, I've jumped the gun there, but go on.
So we're going to be looking at John Harvey Kellogg.
Like Kellogg's, the cereal?
Possibly. Have you heard of John Harvey Kellogg?
No, but I've heard of Kellogg's cereal.
Good. So you have some sort of background, but not really. Not at all.
What? So there's more to him just making cereal?
Yes, there is.
Ooh, interesting. The plot thickens. I'm intrigued. I'm looking forward to that
Good.
now. What could that be? Is he a larrikin? I reckon he might be a larrikin.
I guess so.
We'll have to wait
you'll
and
have to
see.
find out next week, eh? All right. I think it's time
I think we're
to
done.
wrap it up. Thanks for that, Aaron. That was good.
That's okay. Would you describe me as an Aussie larrikin?
Yes, I would.
No, I'm pretty.
I think I would.
No, I'm pretty measured and organised in my life.
You're a measured larrikin, though.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Thank you.
It's a new
Subgenre of larrikin.
of
Yeah.
larrikin. Yep.
The measured larrikin. I like it. I think it's definitely time to end it.
All right. Bye.
See ya. Catch ya.